All right, so welcome to the Front and First podcast.
Podcast where we talk about slaloms and the specific heat of water. No, this really is cool. Welcome, by the way, also to all of you listening out there. I'm in Utah right now. This is so cool. I just want to say this because I'm sitting at the window and I can see the slalom in Park City that they used in the 2002 Winter Olympics, which is very cool. Wow. And I just sit here. I'm doing some work and I watch people go down this thing. And they're going like 100 miles an hour and they're just killing it. So it's pretty wild.
Solomon's the one where you go through like the flags, right?
Yes, exactly.
And you like hit the edge and you look like a badass.
Exactly. Totally.
Nice.
And they look like that. I mean, they're getting like horizontal. It's just crazy. You can tell people here, like there's a lot of people here who have like grown up on this mountain or just they've just grown up with like a board attached to their feet. We met some folks in the hot tub last night and they were saying they were on this part that I can see with like the hills, like kind of like a park area with like the half pipe and stuff. And they saw some dude just do this, like rip this gnarly, like triple backflip. Like I'm serious. Like they're doing these crazy things. They're like, and they've been a bunch of places. Later an hour, they open up their Instagram and then one of the guys they follow had posted it and they had just seen him do it like an hour before. It was the same guy doing the same trick. So like people are here from all over, like,
it's one of the best.
Yeah.
It's one of the best ski places in the US, right?
I think so. I mean, I guess so. I don't know how to judge it. We went last year. It was like too early, so there wasn't a lot of snow. Apparently right now is like the best time of year to do it. So I just have to maybe make this a recurring birthday trip. And then hopefully next year I can actually go out there and my back will feel better. But it is awesome. And the mountain is so huge that it's like kind of hard to even know, all the places to explore. There's just a lot out here. It's really awesome.
Cool. Very cool.
Cool, man. Today we wanted to read Derrick's article. Do we still want to do that or do you want to talk about server components?
Let's do Derrick's article. I really like this article.
Awesome. So we are going to do a little read along here. Our buddy Derrick Reimer wrote a blog post that kind of caught both of our attention the other day, about maybe 2 weeks ago. And we know Derrick. Actually, we've had Derrick on this podcast before.
Yeah, guest of the pod.
He was a guest when he was working on his app Level, which was like an Elm app, which in light of our conversation on TypeScript is kind of interesting. Might be interesting to go back and listen to that, because I remember him expressing very similar sentiments to the kinds of stuff that we were saying and that we've experienced the last 6 to 12 months using TypeScript more and, the relationship to testing and all that good stuff. So how confident you feel in your code, all that good stuff, refactoring. So that might be, we'll link it in the show notes for sure, because that was a really good episode. He had just started with Elmo as his first app, but he's a very thoughtful guy when it comes to this stuff. So he took the time to learn the principles and he articulated them well, I remember. So anyways, today over on DerrickReimer.com, he wrote this blog post. This was ship small, ship fast, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're just going to read it and kind of react. After all, that is what we do most of the time. So this is called Ship Small, Ship Fast. It was written on January 23rd, about 2 weeks ago. And so I'll just start reading it here. So Derrick says, big, long-running feature branches are the worst. They're challenging to tame and they slow you down. The odds of bugs slipping in under the radar are high. Each time you return to the project, you need to load an increasing amount of information in your mental RAM to return to flow. Merge conflicts stack up. I mean, right away, we got a lot of stuff there.
I'm hooked. I'm reading the rest of this article.
Yeah, exactly. I think when we do the consulting stuff, that highlights this problem even more. But even in our own projects, it's a problem. It's annoying. You end up come back to a branch, you try to rebase or merge in master, and you run it again. Oh wait, you have to npm install, and now you're working with like a different version of the dependency tree that could affect the code you were writing. There's so many things, and especially in like a bigger code base too, it gets even harder. So, merge conflicts stack up. Over time, you feel less and less confident in the code. When you ask your teammates for code review with multi-thousand line diff, you're likely to get a quick looks good to me rather than a thorough assessment. Not all projects are inherently small, but you can always break them down into smaller chunks. Why don't I actually just read this whole thing and then we can talk about it? How about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's the best way to do it.
Okay. So not all projects are inherently small, but you can always break them down into smaller chunks. We recently built a SavvyCal feature called Workflows, which allows you to send emails at specific points in the meeting lifecycle. This project was a multi-month effort that consisted of 92 tasks. On day one, we began shipping pieces of this feature to production. That's pretty cool. Right out the gate, we added a workflows page to the navigation and tucked it behind a feature flag, visible only to admins. Then we created a few database tables to store workflow records and deployed those migrations. Shortly after, we shipped the ability to create workflows and see them on the index page. Of course, workflows couldn't do anything yet, but that's a concern for a later time. Next, we added the ability to attach a send email action to workflows. We couldn't send the email yet, but we're one step closer. Then we added a way to attach a workflow to a scheduling link. Each incremental task brought us one step closer to a functioning V1. By shipping these tiny branches to production as we go, we became increasingly confident in the bones of the feature. As soon as a slice of the project was ready to test, the whole team hammered on it in production, an effective way to tease out bugs and rough spots in the user experience. The benefits of this approach extend beyond the ability to QA test as you go. Shipping small parts early on builds momentum for everyone on the project. Getting incremental changes on the main branch and into production frees your mind from trying to hold all the context for the overarching project. Merge conflicts become rare. Peer reviews are quick and effective. As a feature starts to take shape, you might even identify areas of scope that you can cut. That complex flow you initially mapped out may no longer apply now that you've had a chance to put your hands on a production prototype. If the feature feels good earlier than expected, it may make sense to start enabling the feature flag for some real customers to get their perspective. Next time you're staring down a daunting initiative, consider busting it apart into little projects and shipping as you go.
Awesome.
Solid,
awesome,
Derrick.
Marco.
Great job, buddy.
I think when I read this, I kind of realized that so I'm a big fan of shipping small, but I didn't realize all the benefits of shipping small.
Mm-hmm.
And this article really pointed them out. So I'd always thought of shipping small as the benefits of being technical. Things like you have zero downtime. When you're doing small PRs, they're usually easy to merge. You don't have to shut down your website for maintenance to run, conversion scripts. You're kind of doing a pay-as-you-go type thing. Most of the time leads to zero downtime. Things like QA is easier. Code reviews are easier. We've talked about stuff like this on the pod before, but I think that's sort of what I've always thought about as shipping small. But I love the second part where he talks about cutting scope, sharing it with customers. That's amazing. These are non-technical reasons and they're amazing. I never thought you could. I always thought cutting scope was a function of we're running out of time. We have what's the easiest thing we can cut.
Right.
It was always you would only ever cut scope if there was time pressure. But
it's a function of the product. It's a function of the product level decision making.
Yeah, but this brings exactly. This is no, actually we had a user use it and they loved it, and we don't need to add the third feature because the first two features were enough. And I just never thought of you can actually there's a good reason to cut scope.
Yep.
So,
and I have so many thoughts here. First of all, it made me think of when you're working on your own project, you basically are doing this. You're basically coding directly and looking in the browser. And as you go, you don't have any formal process. You have an idea of what you're building, but you're feeling it out. And a lot of times when you tweak changes, you're oh, that works fine. There's this thing that happens, I think is very natural, and most programmers could relate to on side projects, where the actual code and the seeing it in the browser results in a feedback of you changing what you were going to build and potentially reducing scope. And so it's exactly what you described, where the actual implementation details, which you would think is right? If we have our product laid out, I don't care if you use PHP or use Rails. Like those are implementation details. They don't matter for if you could come up with the same application. But when you work on a side project, it's clear sometimes the implementation details, they actually do affect it, like you're saying. So it's interesting because it almost feels like a reverse relationship. But maybe it's because you are really front and center with the trade-offs that are constantly being made when you're writing software and where you want to get to and what benefit you're trying to see. If you're building a sortable list, I want to type it in. I want it to feel good. I want some feedback. And there's a million other things you could do. You could sit there and do a search ahead auto search suggestions. And if that's not the core, if that's not what you're building, you're not going to do that. You're going to keep going because you are so aware of the cost and the trade-off in terms of going down that road, right? But sometimes you want a really satisfying circle to fill up when you choose a goal, and so you go down that road. So it's really interesting because I would have never. I think we usually think about. So kind of on the back of that, the other reaction I had when I was reading this was. Is it kind of flipped from how we think about it in a lot of the ways we talk about it? Because when we think about things like that influence us, like the Basecamp folks and ShapeUp, and ShapeUp's talking about you're going up the hill as you're discovering what to build. And then you have a well-defined problem that you give to an autonomous team. They have the authority to change in order to achieve the outcome. And the outcome is specified not so specifically, right? So that you will have changes in scope. But it almost feels like what you said, which is like normally we think about this like we have a goal and then that's where the shaping process is where we're doing the scope hammering, you know?
Yeah, I think.
And we think a lot more about the trade-off and cost beforehand. Like we don't actually build our features like this. We do like to ship small, but we've never actually like put a link in a header that's hidden behind a flag or even just hidden yeah. Or just even in, I guess we have had a URL route that we didn't add to the navigation, which is an example of this. All that to say, I kind of felt like, even though I love this article and I thought it makes so much sense, when we build and we think about shipping small, it's more like instead of taking what did he say? It's 92 tasks and a multi-month effort. Instead of figuring out how we can ship task 1 today behind a feature flag, like I guess this is kind of devil's advocate. Is this intention with like the ShapeUp? What is the epicenter of this feature, and what can we ship end to end in a week? And I think or 2 weeks. That's kind of how you and I usually approach it.
You know, I don't think they're in tension with each other because I think the epicenter is basically what are the first 2 tasks, the first 3 tasks, instead of saying, okay, we can't ship this until we get 92 tasks complete. So, I don't know. I think if you were making a case that this is still like the workflows, the epicenter thing, that's about like what is going to be in the end of it. But the first 2 tasks are not the same as like the epicenter because the link to a feature that doesn't exist is the whole point when he talked about that's the stuff around the epicenter of the feature that people always spend time building. And you don't have a workflow feature unless you have a workflow. So, just kind of trying to speak as if I were Ryan Singer talking about it, he would say, okay, you need a workflow in order to have a workflows feature. So first, I need to be able to create a workflow. So where is the form where I can do that? But wasn't that the first thing? But that was the first thing they shipped, right? Yeah, I mean, he says
right out of the gate, we added a workflows page to the navigation tucked behind a feature flag. Then we created a few database tables. Shortly after we shipped the okay, create workflows and see them on the index page. Of course, they didn't do anything yet. So interesting. So I was feeling like they were kind of like they had a vision for the whole feature, and then they were just doing it in the way that they did break it up in the way that they could ship it, but like. I guess you would have the form first before the link or something like that. I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah, maybe the wiring is what's important.
You have to be able to click somewhere to get to the form. Yeah, I think that's like tomato. Like,
yep, I'm kind of talking myself into that too, yeah.
I always thought the epicenter stuff is like we're building an email client. So like the first thing we need to do is be able to send email.
Right.
Now, we're going to do that before we do login. We're going to do that before we do reset password.
Right.
And so like I look at that as like, yeah, the first thing we're going to do is create a workflow.
Yep.
I do like how this article forces you to get it in production.
Yep. No, I've kind of talked myself out of it because I think I was hung up on this link thing because it's not something that we would normally do. And it felt like next we have the ability to attach a send email action to workflows. We couldn't send the email yet, but we're one step closer to a functioning V1. By shipping these tiny branches to production as we go, we became increasingly confident in the bones of the feature. As soon as the slice was ready to test, the whole team hammered on it in production, an effective way to tease out bugs and rough spots. Interesting. Yep. I think it is basically, I think when I first read this, I was seeing it as we have 92 tasks to do. Let's break it up into how can we get the easy ones into the code base merged, even if they're behind a feature flag. But reading this again and talking with you, it's like, no, they're actually broken up by most important steps and the first steps for the user to complete the journey, to actually get the job done, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something I missed because it feels like the emphasis is it is like the small pieces, and we became increasingly confident in the implementation. But I think I think the article could actually go further and say, I think the hard part of breaking down. So let's say you have 92 tasks to do for a feature, right? Mm-hmm. You can make a database table and just ship that and merge it in, and it's backwards compatible. But you could take off all of those tasks and just start going through that list. Or you could order them in terms of basically what he says here, which is how fast can we get the user to complete what they're trying to do. I think that this is a real important point, which even could be highlighted even more, because not a lot of teams do this kind of thing. There are lots of teams that work on projects that have well-defined tasks, and there are 80% of the way done across all these different pieces of it, but you can't touch it or feel it in production. So I guess what I'm saying is someone could take away from this, let's get all of this stuff in production merged so we avoid merge conflicts behind a feature flag. Gotcha, but if you can't actually try it out, and not just try it out like the link works or the database doesn't break other queries, you're trying it out because you're trying to do what the user is going to be doing. That is the value, right?
Right. Now, to be fair, he does say that, because he does say that we do try it, and if it feels good, we can get a few customers involved, which is is awesome.
Absolutely.
One thing I want to go back to what you said about like the implementation driving the features, and you gave the example of search, and it's like, do you want to do a fancy autocomplete search or just a basic search? That's what you said, right? Something like that.
Yep.
It's really interesting because you can sit here and you can come up with a feature set, and you can say, we have to have a nice autocomplete search. We have to have something that's like, brings up a drop down, is keyboard navigatable, blah, blah. I add all these features to it because that's what like the best apps in the world do. But while you're implementing it, if you do a search and you hit enter and you get the results back in like 200 milliseconds, you might not need any of that stuff. You might not need. And that's a way where implementation can actually drive feedback. Or the opposite is true. You say you're going to do search, and you run a search and it takes 5 seconds to come back. And now you actually know. And it's like, it's discovering, it's shaping. It's what we always talk about, shaping.
That is such a good point. That is like such a good point and such a clear example of how an engineer could have like ammunition if they wanted to bring something to a product person or manager in order to say, hey, like, let me show you, okay, update, right? And it's a stand up and I show you this works, boom, I search, I hit enter, and you get results back in 200 milliseconds, and your job to be done is done. And then you say, all right, next up. So now you say next up on the task is the autocomplete. I estimate that to be a week, or you double it because that's what you should do as an engineer, 2 weeks. And if you have that conversation in the abstract, especially among all the other competing priorities you have, it's very hard to explain that this is this, especially if you're an engineer, to explain that to your management team or your product person. you have a feeling in the back of your head that's like, this is going to be a huge iceberg. But if you not only break it up into small things and ship small, but the important part is ship, it's like you're shipping in order, then you now can bring it to the person and tell them, took me a week to build this and it works. It's probably going to take 2 more weeks to turn this search into an autocomplete. And then you have the manager or the product person who's like, oh, we're not going to take 2 weeks of your time to do that. Totally good enough. So it's almost like you want, I think that's a really cool point, because a lot of times if you're not in like one of these organizations that they talk about where you have like a technical shaper and a product shaper, so that you're sitting there with your laptop open, going through the feature list, and the technical person is able to say, hey, this thing is a can of worms, it's an iceberg. And the product person wouldn't know that at all, but now they do. This is like a way, if you're able to ship in that right order, you could do that even if you had some dysfunctions in your organization. You were still doing like maybe too much waterfall style development and people were missing deadlines and all that kind of stuff. So It's almost like a ship small, ship fast, but also ship in order. There's like a ship in order part that is just as, if not more important than the fact that it's small and fast, Right. So you're not shipping small for the sake of a small commit.
Exactly.
Or you're shipping small from the feature perspective. What is the small slice of the feature, the first step? You're shipping in the smallest step of the feature journey, of the user journey.
Yeah, if 5 people are working on 5 PRs and they all get 80% of the feature built and it's merged in, that's not shipping small. That's
exactly. Or that might be they might think, oh, we ship small, but actually you miss the point. So that's pretty interesting. It's like shipping a small step. It's like shipping a small sliver or something that connects it back to the customer part, because most of this is about technical stuff, like you said, but really it's like, that's not the point. That's actually not the point at all.
No, it's not. No, reading this article, I was like, oh, I was only thinking about the technical stuff because that's the stuff that benefits me as a developer. But reading about the cutting scope,
the last paragraph,
that was like, my mind exploded when I read that, because like I said, I just always felt that cutting scope was like a concession,
right?
Never a thing to be celebrated. Okay, we didn't.
Right.
Maybe you like do a fake celebration, but it's a concession. We didn't.
Interesting.
Feature.
So you were saying like, oh, we really wanted like a fancy button here or a page transition, and we didn't have time to do it.
Yeah, something like our search is really slow, so we need type ahead autocomplete, but we ran out of time, so we cut. That's like, the app is still usable without that, so we're going to cut that from the scope. So it's not a thing to be celebrated. It's a concession. It's given the budget, right, and given the time. This is a feature set we can realistically build,
right?
But everyone would want that search feature to exist,
right.
But this article highlights there is actually scope you can cut that is completely unneeded. Things you thought were going to be needed, but you can cut it, and that is a thing to celebrate.
That's interesting. That's another thing that I didn't quite get, where I understood that, okay, we need this and it's good to go, but I didn't really quite. It's a really nice, you clarified that very well, that you can have scope cut for reasons of budget and running out of resources and time and having to hit your deadline. But you can also have scope cut that actually makes your product better, because the extra scope was unnecessary, not because you didn't have the time or money for it, but because it literally was unnecessary in terms of helping the user achieve their outcome.
Dude, we've done a ton
That's
of
pretty
features where we're like, oh, we need to do this, this, and this, and then we actually like try something different, or we get to the point where we're like, oh, we don't need to do those 5 extra steps.
Right.
But I never really think of that as like scope cut or anything.
Right.
But on a bigger team where you have kind of the tasks like delegated and given out to you, that is actually scope you can cut.
Right. All right. I guess you could kind of say that it's almost like it's a product decision. It's a change in like the product, but it kind of feels more like cutting scope than it would a product refinement in like a product meaning, because you've built it and you thought you needed it, and it was the technical stuff that changed that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you can only the key takeaways, you can only ever realize this if you're using it in production, because if it lives in a long running feature branch, no one's using it. No one can discover these things.
Right.
And so that's a power here.
That's really cool. Very cool. Nice. I love this article.
Also, just one more thing I want to say on this. It's funny that all these things we talk about, Shape Up, Epicenter, this article, feature flags, they all kind of go back to like the original value prop of Agile, which is, ship early, ship often, break things up. But it's funny that those, Agile has become something that gets twisted and, its meaning is kind of lost. And there's a million software products that do quote unquote Agile that aren't really. And so we've all been on teams like that, right? That say like we're Agile and you have long running feature branches. So it's just interesting that all these ideas that we read about, every few years, they're just
new expressions of the old idea. Like,
they're more exactly. It's the old idea, but it's more like rigid takeaways that you can actually test. Like, are we doing Agile? There's
protocols. There's like actual protocols that you have.
Exactly. So if you take like, break things up into small chunks and write tests and use branches. If you could say like, we're doing Agile. We do all those things.
Right.
You could just lie, right? You could just, you could do all those things, but still do like a quote unquote waterfall development process. Right. But when you get into articles like this, it becomes harder and harder. Like you said, there's protocols. It becomes harder and harder to fake. It's more.
Well, it's a process that's closer to the end of the whole line. So like, if Agile says like user features, not not architecture or system details, right? So you're like, you say, okay, what's the protocol for that? Well, we're going to make cards that are always connected to a user, and it's never going to be like front end, back end, right? It's like as a user, I can sign up to build UI, right? That's pretty good, right? So that's an improvement, but that's like earlier in the step, right? There's still this thing of building it, and you could still fall back to like micro waterfall in the actual execution of that card, like the building out of the card, and so that's where people can get in the trap that you're describing. This is a cool protocol because shipping into production gets you even further where, if you have to ship into production, you have to have a lot of things there in order to support that are probably inherently going to make your company more agile in the good way. In the sense that teams can ship, they can add feature flags. Like, you don't have a huge process slowing you down. You're embracing iteration, and you're getting real feedback. So shipping to production is like closer. And then even closer to that is like, we're not just shipping random things to production. We're shipping the steps of the journey. And so now it's almost like, if the protocol is like, what is the first step of the user journey? And how do we get that into production? You don't even need that card in the beginning, almost, right? Or you don't have to ask yourself, how do we get from that card to that first merge commit? Because now you're focused on this thing. So it feels like a more refined, better protocol because it's closer to the actual point, which is, how do we test this user journey as fast as possible so we can start iterating on it?
Thank you. Yes, that was so well said. Yeah, because when you have a team that does iteration, it's basically, what are we going to do this week?
Right.
What are we going to do next week?
Right.
What are we going to do in week 3? You don't actually ship anything.
Yeah,
you just say, what are we going to do this week? What are we doing next week?
Exactly.
But that's not the point of iteration. The point of iteration is to get you to a point where you can ship. And this forces you to address that. This doesn't let you bury the shipping behind, it's next week.
It's a weasel word of iteration where you're pretending
I'm adding
to be agile.
iteration number 15 to the calendar. Okay, let's go.
Oh man, Sprint 95. What are we doing this week, guys?
Exactly.
No, it's really true. I think it's awesome. It's awesome. A lot of wisdom in this. And it's just cool because like Derrick has been working for himself, building his own companies for years now. 6 years or something. Like, we met him at the MicroConf in 2016, 17. He was left Drip the year before. So
yeah.
Something like that. So he's been working by himself for a long time, for years now, many different software projects, and he's changed how he's thought about a lot of things. He's improved it. He has skin in the game. So I just think there is obviously that he's having success with this, right? because he's talked a lot about things that have not worked out well for him, and he's not had success. And he was very happy with this and the way he talked about it on Twitter with the way his team is shipping. So that to me makes it even a stronger argument to embrace this. He's got skin in the game. He's a guy we trust, and the way he's talking about how successful these protocols are is really cool. So
awesome.
Nice. All right, you think that's a good place to wrap it?
Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks for listening, everyone. I think next week we're going to talk about some cool stuff Ryan's been doing with React Server Components and Next 13. So
yeah,
we'll see how we feel in a week. Every week seems something new comes up, so we'll have to see how we feel about it. But it seems pretty interesting what you're doing today. So
cool.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
See you guys.